What is going on, everybody? Thank you guys so much for joining me today, and I'll be continuing my series on my NHL 2021-2022 season predictions. So now that we've wrapped up the Western Conference, there's only one more conference to do, the Eastern Conference, with two more divisions. So we're going to be starting with the Atlantic Division today with our very first team, the Boston Bruins. But just like we did with the Pacific and the Central Divisions, before I get into the Boston Bruins, I'm going to tee up the Atlantic Division right now. And sorry for the map, these Florida teams ruin everything based on how far they are geographically. But anyway, taking a look at this Atlantic Division, I would say it's pretty well balanced. You look at all the teams in this division, and the best way to describe it is you see the good, the bad, and the ugly. Not to spoil my divisional standings, but I guess I'll give you a general rundown of what my mindset is for this division. If I see one team in particular, much like the Pacific and the Central Division, that I think probably should run away with this division. But apart from that, I'd look at like seeds 2 through 5 as complete toss-ups to me. So I look at these teams in the upper echelon, and I think they're all pretty good. I do think some of these teams do have a ton of question marks going into next season, and for any of these teams, you can make a legitimate argument as to why they should or shouldn't make the playoffs. And then seeds 6 through 8 for me are more rebuilding teams. They kind of just need to build themselves up, move in the right direction, but I don't see them competing in this division because the top 5 are a little bit too good for them right now. All right, with that out of the way, now let's get into the Boston Bruins. So last season for Boston, they did as expected. They were a pretty good regular season team and they made the playoffs. But unfortunately, once again, they fell short of their goal and they lost in the second round. Taking a look at their stats from last season, they had a really good regular season, 33, 16, and 7, 73 points. But that was third in the East Division, a very stacked East Division. But they had an 107-point pace. Taking a look at their offensive numbers, they averaged a 2.93 goals for per game, which ranked 14th in the league, and a 21.9% power play percentage, which was top 10 in the NHL. Looking at their offense, it's definitely a pretty solid offense, but they definitely could be better, because apart from that top line, their depth usually tends to struggle. But taking a look at their defensive stats, a very elite team, a 2.39 goals against per game, which ranked 4th in the NHL, and an 86% penalty kill percentage, second best in the league. I think this team has a very good and quite frankly an underrated defensive core, and of course last season with Tuukka Rask still solid as ever in my opinion. Taking a look at their top 5 scorers, of course first being Brad Marchand with 29 goals and 40 assists for 69 points in 53 games. Honestly, we all know that Brad Marchand is an elite two-way winger, and honestly he's kind of underrated. He quietly was third in NHL scoring, and I feel like nobody really talks about him, and he definitely should have been in Hart Trophy conversations considering how he carries himself and how he carries this Bruins offense, especially being a pivotal part of that top line, one of the best lines in the NHL. Then we had a two-way tie for second, first being Patrice Bergeron, who in 54 games had 23 goals and 25 assists for 48 points. Bergeron's still a great two-way center, probably one of the greatest two-way centers of all time, and him centering Marchand Pastrnak has just been a perfect fit ever since those three were put together. Then also we have David Pastrnak, who in only 48 games had 20 goals and 28 assists for 48 points, so he's a point per game. Again, he's another guy, one of the elite offensive players in the league, very impactful player, amazing goal scorer, and a super underrated playmaker. And then in fourth, we have David Krejci, who in 51 games had 8 goals and 36 assists for 44 points. For the longest time, David Krejci was underratedly one of the best second-line centers in the NHL. And of course, him being a terrific playmaker for this team, and he really got some chemistry going with Taylor Hall when he was acquired from Buffalo. Then in fifth, we have Taylor Hall, who technically got a little bit of production from Buffalo, but I just add them both together. I figured why not? So in 53 games, 10 goals, 23 assists for 33 points. I do feel at this stage, Taylor Hall is slightly overrated. I feel like he's not exactly the Hart Trophy player that he once was. And honestly, I don't know if he's ever going to be that. I don't know if he's that superstar winger, but I do feel like in a second line role, that is the perfect situation for him. And he thrived quite well ever since coming to Boston. Then of course, Tuukka Rask, the starting goaltender, who only played 24 games, but he did have a 15-5-2 record with a 2.28 goals against average and a .913 save percentage. Now, typically anyone who steps in goal tends to do pretty well in Boston, but Tuukka Rask has just been the franchise for the last decade now, and he's just solid as ever, and I still feel like he's one of the more underrated goalies in the league. Entering this season, I still feel like the Bruins are going to be a pretty solid team, but I get the feeling that expectations might be slightly lower than they were in years past. Look at the moves they made in the offseason. There's a ton to unpack here. Firstly, we'll go over the losses. They did lose Jaroslav Halak to Vancouver, who is a pretty decent backup goaltender. He was kind of struggling over the last couple of years, But yeah, letting a backup goaltender walk, not a huge impact on this team. Then they shedded some depth. First, they got Andre Kosha, who barely played really. But they also let Nick Ritchie walk to the Leafs. And I was a little bit surprised. I thought he would play pretty well in Boston, but they decided not to give him a contract. But the biggest hole they have to fill now is the loss of David Krejci, who decided to go back home. That's a massive hole in the second line center spot. And I don't know if they have the pieces to really replace the type of production that David Krejci brought to this Boston Bruins team. In terms of what they added, I mean, they got some replacement depth up front, adding Nick Foligno, very solid two-way third line winger, and Eric Holla, who can play center on the third line. Pretty decent moves, I guess. They also added Derek Forbort from Winnipeg, who should be some good depth on the blue line. The biggest acquisition they got was Linus Ullmark from the Buffalo Sabres, who more than likely is going to be the starting goaltender entering the season, with Tuukka Rask looking to miss some time and still has yet to resign at the recording of this video. Ullmark's a very underrated piece, and despite being on a Sabres team that was absolutely atrocious, he actually put up some very solid numbers. So now him going to a Bruins team that's very sound defensively, I think this is the perfect situation for him, and look for him to have an amazing year statistically. Now, usually in years past, I would be saying that this team's a playoff lock, but I'm not so sure about where they enter this season. I do feel like they got slightly weaker, so I'm going to say playoff hopeful. Potentially their window is closing because the guys are getting older. You know, Patrice Bergeron's a lot older now. Brad Marchand is entering, you know, the mid-30s very soon. Tuukka Rask is a lot older, but I don't know if he's coming back. But the big loss for me is David Krejci. I honestly think that's a massive hole for this team because he was the key catalyst for that secondary scoring. And that secondary scoring was already lacking already. Outside that top line, there's not a ton of offense. So now with David Krejci gone, that could hurt this team immensely offensively. But in terms of my projected top 5 scores for the Bruins entering this season, in first, I got Brad Marchand with 35 goals and 60 assists for 95 points. Any Bruins fans out there would know that Brad Marchand is the pulse of the Boston Bruins. He's an instrumental part in carrying this offense, and he should easily score 90 plus points. And it's very possible he cracks 100. I'm not going to dismiss that possibility. In second, I got David Pastrnak leading the team with 45 goals and also 45 assists for 90 points. He's one of the league's best goal scorers. He's great at finishing. He's a very solid playmaker. He should easily get about 90 points, especially playing alongside Brad Marchand, who's a fantastic playmaker. Then in third, I got Patrice Bergeron if he plays a full 82 games, and that's a big if. 32 goals, 40 assists for 72 points. Maybe the age starts to catch up with him a little bit, but playing on a top line that's highly offensively gifted with Pastrnak and Marchand, he should probably score about 70 points if he's healthy, and he's still great defensively. And fourth, I got Taylor Hall scoring 23 goals and 41 assists for 64 points. Now, the loss of David Krejci might have an impact on Taylor Hall's production, but we all know that he has to be the key to this Bruins team's secondary scoring if they're going to have any success. And I still feel like he's a talented enough winger, a talented enough guy that he should score roughly about 60 points. Anything less than that, maybe 50, would be a little bit disappointing for me. And at fifth, I'm going to go with Charlie McAvoy here with 8 goals and 38 assists for 46 points. Ever since the departure of Torrey Krug last season, Charlie McAvoy was relied upon to really provide more offense and take his game to the next level. And he showed last year what he can do. He had a very solid year, and I feel like if he can score about 40 to 50 points, I think that's very likely to lead the team in scoring on the Bruins blue line. So getting to where I feel the Bruins stand this upcoming season, although there are reasons to believe that they legitimately got a little bit weaker, I still think that they're a pretty well-structured team all around, and I'm going to pick them to make the playoffs because the Bruins, they always seem to come back every single year as a pretty solid regular season team. With that, I have them finishing third in the Atlantic Division with a pretty solid 47, 28, and 7 record for a total of 101 points, and I have them making the playoffs. Now, in years past, this Bruins team has had more dominant regular season teams, and I do think there's some significant losses that could diminish their play a little bit. So with that, I don't have them quite as dominant as they once were, but I still think they're a good enough team nonetheless, and they should comfortably make the playoffs in the Atlantic Division because I trust their offense, especially their top line. I think their goaltending is very solid. Linus Ullmark's a key addition, and they're very sound defensively. I think they'll get in the playoffs. So that's going to wrap up my season preview and my predictions on this Boston Bruins squad. Do you agree with me and think that this team is still very solid and should make the playoffs and could potentially surprise us and try to contend for a Stanley Cup? Or do you guys think that this is legitimately the year where the Bruins start to take a step back, they start declining, and fall out of the playoffs as a result? And let me know what you guys think. Thank you guys so much for watching. Click like if you like this video, and please consider subscribing to my channel. All right, so I'm going to get out of here now. Thank you guys so much for watching again, and I'll talk to you in the next video. See you guys later.